right? How many of you, when you were growing up, you had dinner around the dinner table? Does anybody do that as they were growing up? Like you did that? That's good. How many of you did like the dinner trays as you watch TV? Anybody do that? How many of you currently do that with your family? Yeah, there's a little bit of that. Now, it's funny, though. There's something about families, I think, that do the dinner table thing that's so fascinating to me, right? Because you get people at the dinner table, and you get these moments where it's really fun and loud, especially with big families. My wife comes from a family, they have 5 kids, and they kept going until they got a boy. They just kept going. I think they would have had 12 if you know, they just kept going. And so she's one of 5 kids, and I just imagine what that dinner table would have been like, because it was just me and my mom growing up. But you kind of have like families where they all show up to the dinner table, and you have the moment where the dad gets a little frustrated with one of the kids, right? You have the middle schooler who, you know, does that at the table and thinks it's funny. You know what I mean? You have people at the dinner table who talk and they talk and they talk and they don't stop talking, right? You have the moments in a family, and I love this, where somebody's trying to teach all the kids a lesson. Have you ever seen this? And the kids just don't care. You ever had that? You have moments where you're trying to ask your kid about, you know, how was your day at school? And you're like, no, I need you to take out your headphones first, you know? You have these moments where you're having these like family discussions, right? You're talking about something that should happen, and it's messy, and it's chaotic, and it's nuts, and it's all of those things sort of wrapped into one thing. In fact, I think the dinner table is its own like family sort of culture. When you get people around the table, something just happens. And it's not about the food, it's actually about the people. Now, for our church, and you've heard us talk about this before if you've been around for a while, our church actually probably we would say like we started around a table. We were all in Canton, Ohio. We were all working at the same place. And we were all dreaming about what God might do one day through us. And what would it be like to plant a church one day? And we had this really interesting moment where we had dinner together, we hung out, and then we went through a passage of scripture in Acts, and we started looking at what the early church was. And we started looking at the amazing things that God did in the early church, and we go, well, what happens if you were to do those types of things again? And what happens if you did that with people who are on the fringes of faith, who had doubts and questions about faith? And what would that kind of church be like? And so we started dreaming about it. It was around a dinner table. We all left that night, and it was kind of like everybody had great feels. And the other side of it was like a week later when you go, wait, what do we do with that sort of thing? What do we do with that now? Because the thing about church, and I love this, and you'll hear us talk about this a lot if you're around, is I don't think the local church is just this. As much as I like seeing all of you in rows, actually I see about 3 rows, and then it's just dark. As much as I like you in this room and it's great, and as much as we do this sort of thing together, it's really not just about you coming and experiencing a service, and you've heard a lot of preachers say that before, but at the heart of what the local church is a group of people who are at that messy family dinner table where there's the awkward one, and there's, you know, the one who's always trying to sort of teach something, and there's the one who, it's just all of the personalities wrapped into one, and it's chaotic, and it's beautiful, and it's messy, and it's the local church. And what happened in the early church is you actually saw that. You saw groups of people go all over the ancient world in homes and these places where they would go. And they would just, I hate the phrase like doing life together because I don't really know what it means, but that's what they were doing. They were just experiencing the world together. And you have this sort of culture of a local church that exploded all over the ancient world, not because they had microphones or cool cameras or whatever this thing is, but they had something that was ingrained into who they were. And it was a communal thing, and it was a collective thing. And then on the other side of it, and this is the part we're going to talk a little bit about today, it was the belief that God could do something extraordinary through a group of people who were united and moving in the same direction together. And they just believed that, and they just lived that way. Now, one of the early writers in the New Testament, I love talking about him, is a guy named Paul. If you're a business guy, I love talking to business guys, especially about Paul, because essentially what Paul did is he franchised the local church all over the ancient world, right? So there were these pockets of what the local church was in these different communities and these different areas of the world. And Paul begins to write to a group of these people in Ephesus. And if you've been around church before, you've probably heard this verse. But I think that the bones and the meat of this is so powerful because it actually illuminates the other side of the communal collective thing to what is also inherently a belief of this group of people who are on mission together. And here's what Paul says. He says, now to him who is able to do immeasurably more. So let me just say right off the gate, I want to say this. If you're in the room and you're not a follower of Jesus, or if you're in the room and you're curious or you're agnostic, I'll tell you this. Most of what I'm going to talk about today is going to feel like a family meeting with a group of people who are followers of Jesus. And I think you picked the best Sunday to be here, and here's why. Because for the next few minutes, I think you're going to get a picture of what the local church is and could be if a group of people lived in the way that the early church lived, right? So you're going to get a picture of this. Now, this immeasurably more thing, and I love to call out those of us who are followers of Jesus, this is something that we love to think about but rarely actually act on, right? How often do you assume that the God of the universe can actually do immeasurably more through you? Now he goes on, he says, immeasurably more, but not just immeasurably more than anything you could ask or imagine, which is a big sort of thing. He's going to the depths of your creative being, to as much as you can imagine or even ask for, right? That God could do immeasurably more through you as an individual as we live our lives more and more submitted and open-handed to him. Now, I made a joke about the chips earlier, but that's exactly what it is, right? Like they just keep bringing the chips out no matter how many I eat. How many of you done this on a date before? I love this. I end up paying more in queso than I do the meal because of how many chips that I eat. And then I feel terrible afterwards, right? It's this idea of like, you just can't ask for enough. You just can't get enough. And I think when that sort of thought hits people who are followers of Jesus to the point where it changes them, you begin to understand that oftentimes God's capacity to give is greater than our capacity to ask. My friend Josh Howard said that. I love that. He says, our ability to ask is actually in some ways dwarfed by God's limitless capacity to give as we contend with him on those sorts of things, right? It's this never-ending more and more and more sort of concept. And then Paul goes on, he says, now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, and this is the part that I wish I could convince every follower of Jesus of, and that's this, according to his power that is at work in us. Now this is the part that I think gets me. It's according to his power and ability and not your own. And this is one of the things that's probably the most difficult, I think, for us to apply in a Western culture. Everything you hear, almost all the growth stuff that you hear is really focused inwardly on you and your strength and your ability to accomplish and your ability to overcome and your self-care, all of these things. And a lot of it's good, but it also focuses inward versus looking outward to assume that God might do more through you and in you than you could ever imagine. And for those of you who are followers of Jesus, and this is the word that I wish I could just like ingrain in your mind and it would just make its way to the way that you live. And that's that God's capacity to give to you and through you is limitless. That there is no end to what God could do inside of you and through you. Now, I'll tell you this, and this is, I love thinking about this. This is so much easier to grasp when you're younger. And it's so much easier to grasp when you're not quite as cynical and you're not quite as jaded. Some of you heard my story a little bit, but when I was, I think I was 12 years old, I was in 7th grade, 12 years old, I went to a student camp, like this youth camp that we did, and a pastor talked about the idea that God wants to use people who are submitted to him, that God might do something through our lives. And as cheesy as it was everything that you can possibly imagine about this small, like Southern Baptist youth camp sort of thing, and the music, and then we left, and they're like, go find a spot by a spring or whatever, and I sat by water, and I prayed, and I was outside for the first time, really, in my life, and became a man in that moment, you know? Like, I was doing all these sorts of things. And I remember sitting there, and I remember the simplest prayer that I prayed, like, God, whatever it is that you want to do inside of me and through me, I want you to do it. And I wrote it down, and I began to pray that prayer over and over and over again. Now, you've experienced this, especially if you had those kinds of thoughts when you were younger. And then at some point along the way, I showed it to somebody. And I showed it to somebody that I probably shouldn't have shown it to, because they didn't say that it was wrong or bad. What they looked at me and did, and I love this, they looked at me as if I was cute. Have you ever had that? You ever had somebody look at you and be just enough condescending where you wanted to punch them? You know? Not for real, but a little bit. You know, like, I remember I showed it to somebody and they just looked at me and was like, that's so sweet that you dream so big. You go, you. And I was like, huh. And I'll tell you this. You either hear that enough as a kid and go, oh, that must be true. Or you go, I'm going to go anyway. And you see this with people all the time. You see this with leaders. You see this with people in your company. You see people who are marked by that in one or two ways. They're either going to go, I'm going to move forward anyway, and I don't care, and all this kind of stuff. Or there's a little bit that just gets lodged in the back of your head that goes, maybe it is cute, maybe it is small, maybe it is just something that I shouldn't have been thinking about. Now, we talk about Columbus a lot as a church, obviously because we're here, but there were actually 5 cities that we talked about going to, and one of the things for us is we felt like God moved us here to plant a church in this city for a lot of different reasons. But one of the reasons for us, as we begin to study the city and learn about it, is that on average, there's about 26,000 people in the greater Columbus area who are walking away or becoming sort of like in this nun category of religion every single year in Columbus. And I remember as we begin to see some of these stats and the number of people specifically, and you know this, people who are somewhere in Ohio and they come to Ohio State, they take that first philosophy class where he pokes a hole in Genesis or something and it all comes crumbling down. They walk away from their faith. They leave college, they get married, they land in the suburbs somewhere and they're trying to figure out what's next and they're a little bit apathetic to the whole thing. About 26,000 people roughly every year are walking away from faith every year. And I remember thinking this. I remember writing in my journal once we began to see those stats, and I remember thinking, what would happen, not if we had this massive sort of explosion or revival kind of thing in Columbus, even though I think that would be great, but what would happen in Columbus if the numbers just simply went from like the red version of it to black? Like what would happen if every year it wasn't 26,000 people walking away from the faith, but it was actually going the other direction, and not so far the other direction that it seems too crazy, but just far enough in the other direction where the bleeding stopped because there were churches all over the city that did church in a way where people could come and actually engage with the questions that they had. And I would go to these church planning conferences and we would talk about things. And I'll never forget this, and this is just between me and you, don't tell anybody else, even though we're gonna put it online. I remember I sat there and they were talking about like the number of people you've got to attract to make it viable and all this sort of stuff, which is great and true and all this. And then they started talking about, you know, if you can get this many people connected on an email list and you can expect this many people to come to your church, and everybody in the room was like, oh yeah, 1,000 people. And, oh yeah, we get 1,000 people. 2,000, oh man, they're like, yeah, 5,000, 10,000 people. And everybody's like, oh, we could, you know, they're dreaming big. And this is between us, right? I remember being so angry. Here's why. Because there's not 10,000 people in Columbus. There's 2 million people in the greater Columbus area. Which means if our church was 10,000 people, all the church people would be like, oh my God, it's a big church. Yeah. They just do this, you know? And it's great. And it's the tiniest percentage of the actual people that have walked away from faith in Columbus. And I'll tell you this, it's great if it's 10,000 people, unless the one person who's not a part of this and turning back to faith is your son or daughter who's in their 20s. And it's great if it's a whole big thing until it's somebody that you actually care about who's on the fringes of faith. And this is why this matters so much to us. And it's not about big or numbers, it's not about that. Here's what for me it's about. There are so many people who are de-churched or walked away from church or had questions about faith where they stepped away from it all that are not re-engaging. And this is me, I don't know that there's enough churches trying to create space for those people because we're so comfortable with however many number of people in the room. Now, come on, you don't know this because you don't care about this because this is not your hobby. But I'll tell you, this is exciting. I think it was exciting. We were one of the largest church plants in 2020 or 2021 when we launched in the country. Post-COVID, we kind of running these church plant circles. It's kind of fun. And I sat in a room the other day and they were like applauding. They were so excited. I think it's so great. And it is great. I mean, look at you. It's almost a whole room and we didn't plan that. Some of you remember the days when it was like 10 of us at Cohatch and I was like, God, please let somebody beside my kids show up, you know? Like, Mom, I know you're in Tennessee, but would you mind? You know? And I was sitting in this room going, it's great and it's amazing. And it's this. And what would immeasurably more through you look like, not in a big church sort of way, but in the people that you loved and cared about who actually had questions about faith that they weren't leaning into? Because when it becomes personal, it becomes about people that you love and you care about, it's different. The red to black isn't just a number, it's something different. And so the question that I really want you to wrestle with if you're in the room and you're a follower of Jesus is this: do you believe that God could do more through you than you could actually ask or imagine? And here's where it's personal. I want you to think about the one person in your life who is the least likely to come to a relationship with Jesus. That's your standard of whatever the answer to this question is. Do you believe that XYZ at your workplace, XYZ in your family, XYZ that you are friends with, XYZ that you're not friends with anymore because, you can't bring them around your kids, XYZ, whatever that is, that's the measure by which you have faith that God can move in a limitless way through you. Do you believe that God could do immeasurably more through you? And Paul continues on, he says this. He says this: to him be the glory in the church and in Christ Jesus throughout all generations forever and ever. Amen. Now, again, if you're not a follower of Jesus, this is going to probably not make that much sense. I'm going to do my best to kind of bring it into something that we can kind of digest together. If you are a follower of Jesus, we might think this, but we don't always act upon it. We believe that God's design for the local church was for his love and the gospel to be unleashed through it. And when you hear the word church, most of us think about this sort of thing, which again, I'm for this sort of thing. I think it's great. But that's not what it is. The local church is the body of believers who come together. It's the collective body of people who have experienced life's change through Jesus. And he moves not just through us individually, but he moves through us collectively, which means he moves through collectively for you as a family. And he moved collectively through the families that gathered together on mission together to do something extraordinary. And this is what happened in the early church. And again, not trying to get weird or political or anything like that, but I think this is so fascinating, right? This is where the early church thrived. In a culture, in an area of the world where sometimes it felt like, how does this work and how do we hold our faith in those moments? The early church decided to go against the grain and elevate the dignity of women throughout the early church. In a culture where that didn't always happen, the early church is going, no, we're going to elevate the dignity of all people, but especially you see this with women, you see this with children, you see all these sort of things where the early church goes, no, we're going to do something about that. We're going to do something about poverty. They would gather their funds together and do extraordinary things together. You see that this group of people would go serve in their communities. You would see them come together, invite other people to part of this, and it would be irresistible, not just because of what they said, but because of the power of God moving through this group of people into the world. And that thing felt irresistible no matter what the persecution was or no matter what the culture was like. And this is where, come on, this is like really honest. I hear people all the time going like, Christians are persecuted in America. And I'm like, come on, you showed up today. Like, I get it. But here's what's so interesting, right? In the midst of all of the stuff that you may or may not feel, culturally, politically, all of those kinds of things, right? At the heart of it is the power of the gospel to move through people no matter what the cultural circumstances are or the way that you view those cultural circumstances. It's a group of people who have been changed in an extraordinary way, and the power of God moves through them, not just individually, but collectively and unleashed through them in the world. And that's when extraordinary things begin to happen. Right? Now, I want to give you the best example of this that I know how. So to do this, I need like 3 guys, right? I need 3 guys. Justice, come on up here. Everybody say, hey, Justice. Is this Hakeem? Is this Hakeem? You're Hakeem. Come here real quick. And then, of course, Caleb. Everybody say, hey, Caleb. Come on up here real quick. Now, I'm going to give you the best example of this that I know how. Do we have any 300 fans in the room? The movie. Yeah, okay. Don't worry, I'm not going to make you all fight, though that would be fun to watch. That would be fun. Now, here's kind of the power of what the local church visually would have been like, and you hear us use this phrase all the time. It's going to get a little bit weird for about 2 seconds, but I promise we'll get past it. I want you guys to like lock arms together, not like walk down the aisle lock arms, but like okay. Now, here's what this is, and I think this is such an interesting thing. I couldn't beat up any one of these guys, which you're clearly aware of. But if I were to pick on one of them why are y'all laughing? That wasn't that funny. That wasn't that funny. Now, nice threes. I see you, bro. All right. So here's what's so interesting, right? Together, locked arms together. They're not going to swing at you. They're not going to fight at you. But if they're going to lock arms together, you're probably not going to push these 3 around that much, right? Like I could come at Justice. I really want to do this, but I'm a little nervous, right? But I could come at Justice and like go at him. But then he's locked arms with two other people, right? This is an interesting thing because it advances together, right? Do we have any football fans? Of course you do. You're in Ohio. OH. I love that. That's so great. I lived in Michigan. They ain't got nothing. M-I, C-H-I, and then they forget. No. That was funny. All right, so now here's what's so interesting, right? I played football, contrary to popular belief, for a little bit. I was a quarterback, and we had like our offensive line, and I love this. When they get up to the line, at least at our school, all we did was run the option, which was terrible, but we would do this. They would lock arms together at the line when they came up. And it wasn't that they would lock arms as they moved forward, but as a reminder that as they progressed forward together, that they were interlocked as they advanced and pushed back. Now, this posture and this position is powerful. Now, do a little disconnect. Don't touch each other for a second. This is fine. But at any point, you can kind of mess with one of them and their strength is a little bit gone together. Now, you all know this. This isn't like revelation sort of thing, but I think this is interesting. But when they're locked arms, go ahead and lock arms for a second. This is the best visual, I think, of the early church. Not from a position of power to overcome, but in a position to move forward in faith together and encourage and move together as God prompted them in the world. And no matter what happened around the early church, they moved forward together to do extraordinary things. Give it up for these three very strong, strapping gentlemen. Yeah. Now, the locked arms thing is really, really kind of like a value for us, which means that when we have you talk in a service, it's not because I want you to just talk. I want you to know people. When people bring the biggest questions they have about faith and spirituality, I don't want them to all call me. I want you to process it together in community as a group of people moving in the same direction. I remember watching The Newsroom. Anybody remember the big speech at the beginning of The Newsroom? And I'll never forget this. He does this whole thing at the end, but he says this one line. He says, "We used to not scare so easily." I love that. Because the church at its finest, and even the early church, wasn't afraid of the hard questions. And they weren't afraid of disagreements. In fact, if you look through Acts as the early church was moving, one of the biggest disagreements they had was, is this for everybody or is this for just a select group of people? And they had it out. I mean, it's like scripturally like a soap opera drama. Like they are going at it, disagreeing. And I'm like, that is good. You don't have to be afraid of that. Because as you move together, locked arms together, God could do something extraordinary through you. And you might actually change and learn and grow as well. And so we ask this question of you as an individual. Do you believe that God could do more than you could ever sort of ask or imagine through you individually? But for those of you who call Nuvo home, the other question is this: do you believe that God could do more through Nuvo than we could ask or imagine? Now, I'll tell you, I do. I do believe that God could do something so extraordinary to the collective body of this place that we could see things that's like once in a generation kind of thing. But it causes us to believe that, number one, it is possible for God to do it. And it's possible for God to do it through you and through the people in your row and through us together as a church. So I've shown you this picture. We'll show you this picture 1,000 times. Here's a horseshoe. I love it. When we talk about the M-I-C-H-N, yeah. Now, I love this. I want you just to take a second. I want you to take in like the bigness of this. You ready? Every time I see this picture, I think two things. I think, look how big it is. And this is just me. You ready? And then I think about this guy who's slightly balding in the back of his head, but don't you love that that happened? And here's why I think about both. Because it is both the bigness of the need and what could happen, but experienced individually through the one and the 2 and the 3 people that you care about and that you lean into. I want you to take this in. With the number of people in Columbus that identify as non or disconnected from faith, we could fill the stadium 9 times over. The amount of people that we can get in here and not get arrested is around 500 people. That is not 9 times that number. And what I hope settles in your heart after you leave and go to lunch and do the thing is that you would begin to dream bigger both individually and collectively for us as a church. I put in my notes, and I love this because I always get emails when I say this. Columbus doesn't just need another church. I think Columbus needs this church. And not because we're better than other churches. That's not it at all. I tell people all the time, sometimes they'll come and you can tell quickly, like, this isn't the church for them. And I'll say, let me call up another I know a bunch of pastors in the area. Let me call another pastor in a church that you'd probably be really connected with. But I think Columbus needs this church for a reason. Because this church is focused on the people that would make up that stadium. This church is focused on doing things not so differently. It's not that different. But its heartbeat is very specific for people that you care about in the process of deconstructing or reconstructing their faith. This church is for people who are going to lock arms together and advance forward together, both with fear and trembling and angst and how are we and what if and all those kinds of things, and believe that God's going to show up faithfully at every part of the journey. But I'll tell you this, our greatest temptation will always be to choose comfort over the calling that I think God has placed on our lives, collectively, as a church. Now, I'll be really honest with you. This is like really, really blunt and sort of honest. I get really excited that there's this many people in the room. Here's what I'd love for you to do just for a second. Just look around for a second. Just for a second. Like, it goes all the way to the back. Now, we spread out the chairs so it looks a little bit fuller, but let's be honest. Like, you know. Yeah. There's a lot of people in here, right? Ish. And it's exciting and frightening to me. Because you could come experience this place week in and week out and be content with experiencing this place. I never want us to be there. I want you always to have this discontent that we are moving in the direction that God has called us to be, but we're not there yet. And that we are crystal clear on the calling and the vision that He's placed on us as a church. So this week, we're going to talk about a couple more things, but I really want you to ask yourself this question: what might God do through me? And so I want you to write your first draft at some point in this, if you journal or notes app or whatever this is. I want you to write whatever that first draft is, and then I want you to leave it there, and I want you to come back the next day after you get all the stuff down that you write. And then I want you to ask the question again. And the reason I want you to ask the question again is the first draft are going to be all the things that feel mildly safe, even though they feel slightly out of your reach. But that's not what we're talking about. I want the next thing for you. Right? Some of you are going to put like a son or daughter that you love that has deconstructed or walked away from faith. And that's great. That's a great day one thing. Day two is, and all of their friends. Right? Some of you are going to put like the things when it comes to like your work or your job or those kinds of things, but all those things in terms of dreams that you have for your career and what God might do through you in that. That's great for day one. Write those things down. And day two, I want you to imagine what God might do if you had all of the influence that you couldn't garner for yourself. And what would God do through your leadership then? And you're not ready for it. You're not ready for it. And that's okay. I believe God can make us ready for those things as we move forward and trust Him. Second question is this, and I want us asking this together: what might God do through us? What might God do through us as a church? Now, transparently, for the next few minutes, I'm gonna talk to you about something that's really fun for me to talk about and less fun for people who are unchurched to hear about. So I acknowledge that. In fact, I'll just be really blunt. Most people have told me not to talk about this until about 6 to 9 months in, after we've established culture and then we're there, which is great. But we've been going for a year and a half-ish. We just did it on Zoom. So this is a lot better than Zoom, I can tell you that. So we're gonna talk about this. A lot of people at our church are serving and inviting. But I want us as a church to be called to even more, which is really the last thing that most people who are part of a church dream with, and that's their generosity, right? Now, I'm going to talk to you for a minute about generosity, and let me say this right off the bat, because as soon as I say that, there's a group of you who had a bad church experience, and you immediately turn it off, and so I'll tell you, I get that. I've been in a service before where somebody told me that my mom would be healed of cancer if I gave all the money that I had. All I had was an Applebee's gift card, to which I gave, and she still struggled with it that week. I get it, right? I've been in churches before, and this is always fun for me, where there wasn't enough in the offering, and so they sent it back around again and had the band play again. That was a fun day because I was playing guitar. I've been in churches before that talked about generosity in ways that makes you cringe, and I get it. The reason that it's easy for me to talk about this in this stage is because we raised our salary for the next few years. I'm not trying to get you to give money so that we can eat not ramen noodles, right? I get it. Now, I'm not eating at the restaurants you talked about earlier, but I get it, I get it, right? Here's what I want for you if you're here and you're a follower of Jesus. I want you to experience what it's like to be so locked in to a mission that you're willing to sacrifice for it to see it come to pass. Now, the reason that people tell you not to talk about this until several months in is because at some point along the way, you're trying to garner trust with people before you talk about this. And I totally get that. My only thing is this, and this is really transparent with you. God has already blessed us in extraordinary ways. And so the things that I wrote down in my journal over the last year were things that I was a little bit nervous to talk to you about because everybody told me it wasn't time to talk to you about it. But I don't think you're most people, and I don't think we're most churches. God has already been extraordinarily faithful to us. You're sitting in a building that we came and prayed for almost a year, every single week, and asked God to give us this place even though we couldn't afford it, and then he did through the hearts of people who are extraordinarily generous to us. I could tell you story after story about the way that God has been faithful, and I'll tell you, it's easy for me to talk about this because I believe so much in who we are. And so the first thing that I want to talk to you about when it comes to generosity in this mission is this, and my friend Ryan, most of you know Ryan, he wrote this, and I think it's so good. You're not giving to your church. That's what I grew up in. I give 10% to my church, and then as I give 2% or whatever, 10% to my church, God blesses me, right? Now, I think God blesses us in incredible ways when we open up our hearts and do things, sometimes unexplainable and sometimes just in your heart working in you, which is really powerful. The problem with this idea and this statement, don't miss this, is that it really puts all of it on you and the focal point on you as a person. Now, I think that's really good, and God does do extraordinary things inside of you as you do that, but it removes the communal and the collective nature of what happens at a local church when people give. I love how Ryan said this. He said this. If you don't give to your church, what you are doing is you're giving with your church. And when you give with a group of people, not just Nuvo, that's a name. When you give with this group of people, collectively you can see extraordinary things happen as people come together with open hands and open hearts to do extraordinary things. So this is kind of the bottom line. We're going to talk about this throughout the course of this series, and that's this. There is no limit to what God can do through a group of people who are united in faith. There's just not. And you can see this throughout history, throughout churches, throughout all of these sorts of circumstances. And so for the next couple minutes, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell you what I've been writing in my journal for the last year that I was planning on talking to you about somewhere around year 2, but screw it, we're going to talk about it now. And the reason that we're going to talk about it now is because I believe that God can do extraordinary things through us right now. So let's talk about us. We're going to talk about us, and then we're going to talk about the ways that we're going to go outside of us. So Nuvo here in Columbus, there's 3 specific things that I really want to see happen. The first one is this. I want us to create irresistible spaces for children to explore faith. I won't try to hide this throughout the years. You'll probably know this about me at some point. I care very much about you as an adult. I care a whole lot more about your kids. And here's why. We have this extraordinary opportunity to shape the next generation. And I was in family ministry for years and years and years and years and years and years. And well, maybe not that many years, but I was in family ministry for years, right? And I'll tell you this, right? I have not seen personally a church that started from the beginning in helping people process faith in a way that by the time they get to middle school and high school and college, that somebody wasn't able to poke the kinds of holes in it where it fell apart. And I've got kids, right? And I'll tell you, I love what happened in this room. And I believe so deeply that we have this beautiful opportunity to be able to shape the next generation in a way where we can anticipate the questions that are coming and help them process them, not just by giving, sort of answers that are easy, but by helping them process it in powerful ways. I want us to figure that out. And then you know what I want to do? I want us to figure it out, and then I wanted to send it to every other church in the country so that all the kids in the whole country can figure out all this sort of stuff. And if we don't figure it out, we're going to go find the people who do, and we're going to steal it, and we're going to put our logo on it, and we're going to give them credit for it later, right? I'm kidding, We'll do it, And here's why. Don't miss it. Because this, especially if you're a parent, you get this is the greatest legacy that we could leave. Then a generation who's being discipled by whoever that, 2 minutes on TikTok is, which is great. That we are able to help them process faith in an intelligent way. You can be a smart person and have faith. You can be a smart person and wrestle through your questions. You don't have to have overly simplistic answers that God can move through us as a church to train kids to be ready for what's coming. That's the first thing. The second thing is this. We want to develop a digital front door for the people of Columbus, right? Here's the big goal, right? And again, this is probably stuff that I should say later on. Again, it's going online, but maybe we'll cut it out. Most people will invite people to church if they live within a distance of about 20 minutes away. And we have a loop here in Columbus, so that helps us out a lot. But most people will invite if it's around 20 minutes away, which for us means two things. I want us to put nouveau churches all over Columbus so that every person in Columbus could attend a nouveau church at some point like 20 minutes away. Because we could fill up the stadium 9 times. Now, to do that, our culture has shifted where most people attend our church for the first time digitally. They watch this on Facebook or YouTube or Instagram, and most people just kind of skim through to see what it's like and pick up a couple points or whatever, right? I want us to be so great at that it feels irresistible when people start seeing us from the beginning, right? The third thing is this, right? And this is the least sexy thing of all the things that we're going to talk about when it comes to generosity and giving. And no one likes to talk about it, and I love it. We're going to talk about an opportunity fund, and what I mean by that is this. You may not know this, but Dublin is an incredible city that doesn't build a lot of churches. It's just hard to build a church here and get it rezoned. It's just difficult to do that. Which means when a place comes available that we could actually purchase a building, there's 2 ways to think about it. You could go, oh, there's a building now. Let's go figure out how to raise money and do that. Or you could go, we're going to start thinking about that now so that whenever God provides the opportunity, we're in a financial position to be ready for whatever that is. We're in a financial position to be able to go, hey, that's an incredible opportunity. We're going to step into whatever that is. It's an opportunity fund that allows us to go, hey, somebody else is doing it better than we are. Let's go fund that so that we can see what kind of R&D they have so that we can pick up those ideas specifically around families and kids and that sort of thing, people deconstructing their faith. That's what we want to create. And that is margin. And nobody talks about it. This is like the savings account thing that you have, that it just happens. And sometimes you think about it, sometimes you don't. But when you need it or when you're ready for it, it matters. And nobody likes to talk about that. And it would be one of the most pivotal things that we could do as a church to be ready for what God might have for us in the next steps as we dream together. And so I want us to be figuring that out 8 weeks in. Come on, there we go. That's great. All right, here's the next one, right? I want to give money away. Most of what we're talking about right now was sparked actually over queso this past week, and I love this. Let me show you this. This is my friend Carlos. Everybody say, hey, Carlos. There will be a day where he watches this. Today is not that day, so don't tweet at him. Carlos is planning a church that's very similar to ours in another part of the country in Miami, Florida, which is where some of you wish you were today when it snows for the first time, right? He's planning a church there specifically for people who are on the outskirts of faith, and he's doing a remarkable, remarkable job. And so I'll tell you, this is full transparency. We knew that we were going to do the series. We knew the kinds of things that we were going to talk about. We knew the kinds of things that we were going to challenge you towards. And I knew that, this is what I felt comfortable with being able to give to Carlos for his church plan. Carlos launched a week before we did, and they're doing a phenomenal job. And I knew we wanted to give to him, but I was going, there's a number that I felt really comfortable with. And so this past week, we were at a Mexican restaurant at like 8 o'clock Texas time, so it was real late. And so I was sitting there, and we're talking, and I'll tell you, as I'm talking to Carlos, he's describing all these sorts of things, and we had just came out of a room where some people had celebrated what God had done here, which is really exciting. I'm sitting there over queso with Carlos, and he has no idea, and we're talking about some amazing things. And I remember thinking the number that we had in mind was extremely safe. And it was extremely safe just because we hadn't talked about what God might do through us beyond us. We just hadn't. Because this is something you talk about later on. And I remember sitting there to the point where I felt like, not some Morgan Freeman voice, but I just felt like God was kind of speaking to my heart and going, hey, no, we're going to challenge ourselves to give beyond ourselves, even beyond Columbus, to another place. To a guy that you may never meet, though I hope you do go to Miami and we send teams and we help them out at times, and I hope they bring people here too. But to a group of people that you may never meet that is doing a work that is as important as we're doing here in another part of the country, right? And so I'll tell you, we're gonna help fund Carlos. 8 weeks into a church plant, that's what we're gonna do, and we're gonna challenge you to be a part of that as we move through this together. Now, the third thing that we're going to focus on this year, and again, if I get the things that I feel like God is putting in our heart to do, this is one of the biggest things for us. This is an organization called Our Daughters International. If you're familiar with it, you probably don't need any sort of introduction to it. There's a guy named Ramesh who is over in Nepal, and their entire ministry and work is focused on helping young girls who are being trafficked across the border, helping that whole thing to stop, but not just getting them to stop being trafficked. What Ramesh has done is then created really powerful systems on the back end of it to help these young women be empowered and prepared to move forward in the world beyond those moments, right? It's incredible work that he's done. I got to hang out with him a few years ago in Michigan. I brought him up, and he's one of those guys that, you bring him up and you're going to interview him, but really he just talks the whole time because I don't need to say anything, right? And he just talked about these things that they were doing. It was extraordinary. The first thing they talked about, and I just told you, is they really focus on safety. And so what they've done at this point in the game, they've been doing it so long now, they have girls that have come out of this trafficking thing and now come back, and they place them at the border and they watch for the girls that are going to be crossing the border. And what they do is they have conversations, they've created systems in place to help get them out of those situations, right? Second thing they do is, I talked about, they do empowerment. So the big thing for them is they're working on education, they're working on physical health, they're helping them with counseling, being able to be emotionally prepared and spiritually prepared for really what God has put in their hearts to do as well. And then the other thing is they are working to eradicate this, and this is probably my favorite part of it because they're kind of like ninjas with this. They're working through government systems to eradicate this sort of thing happening in Nepal. And we'll hear this at some point in this series, just the stories of the ways that they've begun to dismantle some of the systems that just fuel this type of activity over there. And then the last thing is they work to develop these people. And so what they'll do with these young women is they'll actually help them to have the skills that they need for a job. They help them create micro businesses. And then collectively what they do is they do micro loans to help these companies get started on the other side of the world with these young women. They're doing these things through Our Daughters International. And I'll just tell you, of all the missions organizations, there's a lot of great ones. This is the one that we feel drawn to support, and we're going to support them. And again, I'll tell you, I had a really great, comfortable number in my head until queso. And so we're sitting there, and I remember all of this conversation with Carlos, and I walked out, and I just began to pray, and here's what I've been praying for you, right? I've been praying for you that God would just begin to just disrupt your heart enough that you would lean into this. And what I've been praying also for you is that you would actually, if you're in the room and you're a follower of Jesus, believe this idea that there is actually no limit. There is no limit to what God can do through a group of people who are united together. So here's what I'd love for you to do. At the end of your rows, and I always mess this up, on the left side at the end of your rows, go ahead. I think there's a card at the end of your rows. I'd love you to pull those out and pass them down the row if you can. Where are those at, right? Did I say that right? It's on the left side, right? Are they on the left side? Yeah, on the left side. Go ahead and find those real quick. And then I want you to just pass them down the row. It's like a little card that says together. I'd love for you to pass those down the row. I want us all to kind of look at this for a second. I'm going to tell you two things. Number one, I'm not going to ask you to do anything with this today except to hold on to it and look at it. We're not going to do anything with that, but I want you to hold on and I want you to look at it. And then secondly, I want to tell you this. If you're a follower of Jesus, I'll tell you right out the gate, right? I'm going to tell you right out the gate. For the next few minutes, I'm talking to people in the room who are followers of Jesus. If you're not a follower of Jesus, I still think we're the best place for you to give to. I will say that up and down all day long, I think this is a place to give to. I believe in it. But I would say in the ways that I'm about to challenge everybody else, if you're here and this is not your thing, or even if you're a follower of Jesus, you just don't trust the church, I get that too. What I want you to do over this next season is to pick some number or percentage over the next year and give it somewhere. Even if you don't give it here, I want you to give it somewhere, right? I do. And I want you to lean into that because I think it does something to your heart and it does something to the power of God, I think, whether you would acknowledge it or not, moving through you in the world. And so whether you give it here or you don't, if you're not a follower of Jesus, that's great. Go for it. If you're a follower of Jesus and you don't trust the local church, I get that too. Go give it somewhere else. But if you call Nouveau home and it slipped out at some point or another, like we're Facebook official here, I want to challenge you to give to these initiatives and to give to this place, right? Now, here's what we put on the card, and I'll tell you, you got your name, all of that stuff. What I'm going to ask you to do is I want you to think through the course of this next year. I want you to think about this over the course of the next year, and I want you to think about financially what it would look like for you to lean into this in an open-handed way in faith, right? Now, I'll tell you why we put the boxes, because the boxes are the most awkward and weird part. I know that, so we'll just call it what it is. Here's what I know about the boxes, and this is what I want you to process through. As soon as you see the boxes and you see numbers on it, even if you were like open to doing this, your brain immediately went to one box on that card. My brain did too. I'll tell you, we printed these cards yesterday right before they closed. Thank you, FedEx people. And we printed them out, and I'll never forget this moment going, I thought I knew exactly what we were going to do as a family. And then I realized that what I'm challenging you to do, we haven't done or processed yet as a family. And so we're going to be doing that together as well. But your brain went to one of the boxes. What I want you to do over the course of the next few weeks is I want you to ask God, what might you do through me? And I want you to look beyond one or two boxes beyond that. Now, that may not be what you do, but I want you to begin to pray as if God might actually move through you in a way that makes you feel stretched. And then what we're going to do, it's going to be really simple. On December 5th, we're all going to come back. We're going to ask you to stand up here with the microphone. I'm totally kidding. We're not going to do that. I'm totally kidding. We're not going to do that. I'll tell you what we are going to do. We're going to come back on December 5th. Some of you are already like, I think I'm busy. I think I'm going December 5th. I don't know. I think I'm out of town. I don't know. December 5th, what we're going to do is we're going to come back. And it's not going to be anything like coming on a stage or anything like that. But we'll have a card here waiting for you. And for the next few weeks, over Thanksgiving, I want you to be praying, God, what would you do through us as a family, through me as an individual, and then collectively as a church? What might you do through us to do something extraordinary when it comes to generosity? And so let me tell you this. Some of you have never given to a local church before, and just giving it all feels like a massive step. Great. I want you to pray about what that step might be for you. Some of you, come on, we're really honest. I love talking about it. You're like tippers, which is fantastic. Like if the message is good, you throw a 20 in. And I think that's fantastic. We're super grateful for it. But I can tell you the messages aren't always going to be good. So it doesn't really do much for your heart in those ways. I want you, if that's you and you've given before, I want you to think about what your plan is to support the works that we're talking about here. And develop a plan and a percentage to give. And it not just be kind of that tipping sort of thing. I want you to give in some sort of consistent way. And then some of you, if you're really honest, you are giving and you're giving a percentage and you've actually made a plan, but you're like me and the plan that you have is safe and it's comfortable and it's a little bit like a Netflix bill that comes out of your account every week that you don't really think about because it's just safe and it's a bill. And what I want for you is that you can experience what it's like to sacrificially give beyond yourself. And for some of you, that number is going to be exactly the same. You're going to pray for the next few weeks and go, nope, it's exactly the same. But for some of you, God's going to challenge you to do more. And I'll tell you, as he does that, there's something about being open-handed that does something to your heart and moves through you. So we're going to invite the band to come back up. I want you to do this for that card. I want you to keep that card. And I want you to keep that card for the next few weeks. We'll have them here kind of the few weeks leading up to December 5th as well. And as you keep that card, what I'd love for you to do is you process through it. is I want you to pray as a family. I want you to put it somewhere where you can see it. Some of you, that's going to be like on your bathroom mirror. Some of you, that's going to be on the refrigerator. It's going to be really awkward at dinner parties, but that's okay. Like, you're going to put it on your refrigerator. Some of you should keep it in your wallet or your car, put it right there. And I just want, every time you see it, I just want you to begin to pray, God, what would you have us to do? What would this actually look like for us as a family or as an individual? And I'll tell you what my prayer is, right? I'll tell you, is that when we come out over the course of the next year, that the initiatives that we've talked about and the ways that we've talked about investing our resources, it feels incredible and we get to celebrate it. And then when we come back again, that it also feels small. And that we look at it and we go, look what God did. And also, look what God is going to do through us continually. And I hope as you do that, I hope that we continue to dream extraordinarily big. And that we go after the initiatives that God's placed in our hearts. That we create the kind of church in Columbus that I believe that Columbus needs. And we do it for the people that you love and that you care about. The people nationally that you may never ever know. And the people globally that you can make a difference in simply by focusing in and developing a plan on how you're going to lean in financially to what God's going to call you to do. So here's what we're going to do today. I'd love for you to stand up, and we're going to sing this last song, and then I'm going to come and I'm going to wrap us up here in just a second. But here's what I want you to do. This next song is a song that was actually the very first kind of worship song we did, and it was in a Cohatch in Polaris, which is also a bar, but we'll talk about that later. And there were about 15 of us in the room, and Ruth led us in this song. The song's called Make Room. And the song is really beautiful and it's incredible. Then it gets to the chorus. It says, shake up the ground of all my religion. I just love that part. And it talks about kind of how God sometimes moves us and disrupts things and shakes things up in our minds and our hearts and our lives. It sort of spurs us on forward if we make room for him in those spaces. So I'll tell you this, if you're a follower of Jesus, I'm going to ask you to sing this out as a prayer. If you're a bad singer, great, we all are. So it's great, you'll pick that up pretty quick. I'm going to ask you to sing this out as a prayer. And if you're not a follower of Jesus, here's what I'll tell you, and I've told you this already. I want you to engage with the principle that we're talking about, whether it's here or not. And for the next few minutes, whether you sing this or not, what I hope, at least in your mind and your heart, that you do, is you go, God, if you're up there, which is a totally fine prayer to pray, if you're up there, help me to make enough room in my heart, in my life, in my resources, in the way that I give my time, all of it, to at least create space for you to show up and me be comfortable there too. So as we sing this song, I hope that you're reminded of that and that you are able to create that kind of space in your own life. Let me pray for us. Father, we thank you so much for what you're doing here and that we get to be a small part of it. God, we thank you that you have already answered so many prayers and that you've already shown yourself extraordinarily faithful and that you do things in our midst that feel so far beyond us already. God, we thank you for the generosity of so many people and churches that have even allowed us to be where we are right now. All the churches across the country who have locked arms with us and will never meet the people in this room. We thank you for the individual families that have locked arms with us already from different parts of the country and believe the things that we talked about today enough to create a church in Columbus, Ohio, for the people that would fill that horseshoe. But Father, I pray that you would help us in this moment, as early as it seems, as young as a church as we are. And I pray that you would help us to recognize your faithfulness and then to lean into it. And God, that you would move our hearts, reach out in faith, and reach for things that we could never grasp on our own, that only comes through your supernatural power in and through us. So God, as we sing this song, God, help us in our minds and our hearts to make room for what you're gonna do. And we actually pray that you would disrupt our minds and our hearts so that we're positioned to experience the church and the life that you've called us to experience. In your name we pray.